Hey, welcome back to the Koinonia Podcast. We are here with Tiffany Loeffler from Defending the Cause. How are you?
I'm good, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are talking about trauma-informed care. That's kind of where we are. We've been doing some parenting podcasts. We've been doing some different videos about how to not hate your kids during this time. And we are excited to talk a little bit more about what is it about this adoption population, foster care population of kids and families, and the kids are super probably either really isolated or really angry, being stuck at home with mom and dad. The kids come from situations that are probably nothing like what they're dealing with now, especially with some overseas adoptions and there's domestic adoptions. And as we talked about in our shorter video, that adoption failure rates are on the rise. What does that mean? It means that a lot of kids were adopted. Adoption has been a huge driving force in the state of California, especially. And it's great. It's amazing. Lots of kids from foster care going into permanency if they can't go home. Obviously, overseas adoption has been kind of a steady in the United States for a long time. And so go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you've done personally.
Absolutely. My husband, Matt, and I have two kids who are adopted from Haiti. They've been in the United States for 3 years. It was a 6.5-year journey to get them here. So there was some definite complications on the international adoption side, but they're now 14 and 17. So we're in the middle of the trauma teenage years.
Boy, I once heard that kids have kind of each developmental stage, age range, they go into a different understanding of their adoption, and they go into a different, obviously, behavioral style trauma response, and the odd behaviors kind of change from the tantrums to the anger and the outbursts, and then when they turn 14, they go back into tantrums. So there's kind of an evolution there of growth. But with adoption and trauma, we see things changing over time.
Yes.
And so the longer you have a child, in fact, we have some families that are calling us and the kids are 20 and 25 and they're saying, hey, the issue is finally the stuff you talked about 15 years ago in the training. We see it now.
Yep.
And so you don't know if it's going to happen immediately or if it's going to happen years down the road. And you were just talking this morning about the three types of kids that TBRI discusses. What was that again?
Yes. Karen Purvis, who was the co-founder of Trust-Based Relational Intervention, said it this way, that a third of kids who come into foster and adoptive homes settle in well. They assimilate and they want to connect with their new family. They're excited about being in a safe environment, maybe for the first time in their lives, and they just click. And then there's this middle third of kids who really need some additional support. I know that Koinonia does a lot of that with trainings and support groups and other services, but these kids need counseling, they need nurture groups, they need some intervention to help them value the safe environment that they're in and learn how to connect well with a parent or authority figure when they had a really bad experience before. And then there's this final third of kids who have experienced such intense or prolonged trauma that they have a really hard time being able to connect. And I think an older term was the reactive attachment disorder. I know that's very rarely used anymore, but these are kids that have a really hard time processing through their own inner chaos. And so it really makes it hard to relate well to other people.
Yeah, the kids that are raised in a hyper-vigilant state of mind when they're younger, often we use the idea of a bear chasing you, right? If a bear is chasing you and you go into this fight, flight, or freeze, part of your brain, and you start to freak out and react. Well, imagine a child is raised in a home where a bear is chasing them every day, and that bear might be whatever trauma they're dealing with. And so you take a child from a traumatic situation where they're surviving, and you place them into a loving, caring, comfortable, often maybe cleaner and in a different neighborhood home. And we ask these kids, and especially with your kids being overseas, who knows what those living situations were that were probably comfortable for them because it's what they knew. And now we go into, now I live in Placer County, California, which if you're watching this from somewhere else, Placer County is is a very nice and quaint county. It's different than Haiti.
Yes,
I can tell you that.
Very different.
And what was that like, right? And this is now we're talking about essentially a cultural adjustment too.
Yeah, I think when we go into adoption, we always think, or at least I did, that we're providing a better place for our kids. And that's very true. But at the same time, like you said, it's big change. And it's interesting because the psychology of change, I've studied it a little bit, and all change is initially viewed as loss. And even if it's a good change, you're still giving up something to change to something new. And so our kids gave up a lot. They gave up the foods that they liked and the culture that they enjoyed. And the Haitian culture is very communal. So you share. Our kids are always outside playing. I think that's been the biggest loss for our kids, is that we as Americans set up play dates. And there was no such thing as a play date in Haiti. You just went outside
every day.
And
was
there's
a play
kids.
date.
Yeah, there's kids everywhere. And so they were just used to being around their group of peers, and nobody had anything, but they shared. So if somebody had food one day, they would share, and it would go vice versa. And there was this way of the whole community knew who you were and who you belonged to, or where you were from. And then there's such an individualistic culture. We pull into our garages and we close the garage door, and we know all of our neighbors by name, but we don't often go to their houses. We have our friends who will go to their houses, but again, that requires planning, and that's hard for kids that used to be around others.
No, I get it. I was in San Diego one time, and I was at a restaurant, and I saw a guy. I said, I think that's my neighbor. And I actually met him for the first time in San Diego, even though he lived across the street for 2 years.
Yep.
And so huge cultural change from going from one home to another home, or one country to another country. And what's amazing, we tell our parents a lot, is your success in your adoption is their loss, right? And so it's a struggle, right? Because some people want to adopt and then have the adoption celebration every year, the gotcha day, right? And I'm all for that if the child is for that. But sometimes for a child, that's a reminder of a traumatic loss.
Right.
And so we got to be really careful to, in my opinion, to talk to the kids and make it an environment that they can say, I don't like that.
Right.
Are the kids allowed to be honest? Do you have the type of relationship with the child that they can say, you know what, Mom or Tiffany or whatever they choose to call you, I don't want to celebrate that.
Yep.
I'm kind of angry that I live in America.
Yeah.
I've heard of adoptees who have been angry about being removed.
It's a very real thing.
And that's a loss.
And it comes in waves too. So there's an enjoyment of the current moment, and then there's sometimes the grass is greener on the other side feeling for all of us, even as adults.
Yeah.
And so we've celebrated some gotcha days, and then we haven't celebrated some gotcha days over the last 3 years. And it does. I mean, if our kids can go to Sunsplash, it's a win for them. But they also
there's not many Sunsplashes in Haiti, huh?
Nope, not so much. So they're fans of that. But acknowledging that, I mean, we have a rare case with international adoption that it's an open adoption. They both have birth moms. One lives in Haiti now. One has moved to Brazil because our kids are not biological siblings.
Okay.
So there's an openness to that, and they understand why they were given up to live in an orphanage.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is one of those things where we can celebrate that we're a family, but sometimes just families have friction. Adoptive families have more friction, honestly, than a lot of biological families. Not always, but certainly it's just you're assimilating people who aren't technically DNA-based related to you, and that takes a blending time.
Yeah. Well, and that's really a culture shift, I think, for the industry is, and if you don't know already, historically, adoption was a closed file, right? They call them closed adoptions, and to this day, if you were a person of a higher age category and you were adopted, your file still might be closed. And today, the culture is we're not replacing family, we're adding to family, right? The open adoption style.
Yeah.
And so understanding what the child is going through. So we're talking about really trauma. We're talking about the child's perspective. But that's kind of how I think of it. I think of trauma as what's going on for the child in the moment, rather than I see a behavior as a parent, and I'm frustrated with the behavior. But you got to ask why.
Right.
What's causing the behavior? Because behavior doesn't just exist for no reason. Behavior is a learned experience. It's something to do with what they were shown when they were younger, or they're responding to something.
Yep.
And so when I say trauma to you, or trauma-informed care to you, how would you describe that?
Well, they say kids act out what they can't talk out. And most of these kids haven't learned how to talk about their feelings. They just have big feelings. They haven't learned how to voice what they need, because if they cried as a baby and nobody came, they were told that their voice didn't mean anything, or didn't change anything, or didn't produce the healthy outcome. Some kids that cried or that have voice needs were then beaten or neglected, and things got worse if they spoke up. And so a lot of kids, modeling is how parenting's done well. When kids are modeled how to, communicate a need, or to respond appropriately to a tough situation, or just how to eat out at a restaurant. If they've seen that, they're more likely to be able to do it. But if they've never seen it before, it's really hard. And so trauma-informed care to me is having a parent or caregiver recognize behavior is all communication, and then you have to be the detective to go on and dig through and sift through some of the past experiences and internal conflict or chaos that's going on inside the child, to really reach to what they're trying to tell you.
Well, and how much of this, the behaviors, how much of that do you or your husband, not to speak for him, but does it feel personal?
Oh, always. It was so interesting. I think the biggest surprise to me is that during our adoption process, we visited Haiti a lot. My husband Matt went 40 times. I went 26 times. There's a lot of connection.
That sounds cheap.
Yes, right. International travel. Oh, boy. But all of those trips, all of those times spending bonding and connecting, was also opportunities for me to engage well, learn about their personalities, and kind of what I called putting money in the bank.
Yeah.
And so I assumed that all of those trips and time would equal better, deeper connection when our kids came home to the United States. And what was very interesting was I went 26 times, but I left 25 times without them. And that also reinforced that healthy people that are going to feed you and make sure you have money to go to school and make sure that your needs are met in the interim of coming to America, that those people even would leave and would not. I mean, we had no control over the whole process. It was complex, to say the least, on the U.S. side and the Haitian side. But we weren't an authority figure over our own paperwork, so how could we be trusted to be reliable in other settings? So it's been interesting to parent through those opportunities to connect. And we see a lot of behavior, and because I think I came into this thinking it was going to be our kids and us against their trauma. We would be together on the same team, and we'd be facing the world together, facing their past challenges together, facing their future challenges together. But as you've seen in all of the families that you've worked with, when kids feel the safest, they're going to act out the most.
Yeah.
And it's going to be directed at their primary caregivers, because they see that primary caregiver as the conduit to anything negative that's happening in their world or in their internal world.
But is it about you?
No. I would say 99% of the time, if there's something else, I might be the trigger, but it wasn't the trauma.
You might represent the mom that left them.
Right.
Or the dad.
Right.
Rarely do the dads have a relationship or a loss with the kids, because unfortunately many dads are not there.
Right.
And so kids of trauma tend to target the moms because they have the mom.
Right.
They don't always want another mom, and they're mad at their mom.
Right.
And you're like this replacement mom, and you're just trying to help. And I always tell foster parents, before they get a kid, I said, okay, you're going to be super excited when the kid gets there, and you're like, oh my gosh, we got a kid, and they're gonna love our food, and they're gonna love our life, and they're gonna love us, and they're gonna appreciate us, and they're just gonna sing our praises. And the reality is the kid's gonna look at you and be like, another person to hurt me, right? I start to feel safe. That's scary. Now I'm gonna act out, right? I'm gonna reject you before you reject me. I mean, it's you've seen it year after year.
Yep.
And so, but sometimes you have to take that break. sometimes you have to back up and say, okay, this is not about me.
Right.
And so what do you think about parents going to counseling as a result?
Huge. Such a need. I feel like there's kind of two groups of people. When you're entering the foster care and adoption realm, there's two groups of people that you need. You need the people who support you. You need the people who are willing to bring you meals or take your kid to school. Some really good friends said, hey, my car broke down last week. Can we take your kids to school? Can we be there for you? You need those amazing friends who say, I'm going to, this is grandparents. This is, close friends. Absolutely. You need those people who say, I really love your kids. I understand about this much of their trauma history, but I'm going to keep showing up, and I'm going to be consistent for you, and I'm going to be consistent for them. But then I also tell parents, you also need the people who really understand you. And a learned experience is so much different than a communicated experience. A learned experience means I can connect with my other adoptive parent friends in a whole new level. Because when I explain behavior that I see, a lot of people, just well-meaning people, say, oh, that's just the teenage years. But if they saw behind the scenes of what's happening in my house, that's on steroids when it comes to trauma, because the teenage brain is rewiring. All teens, their brains rewire, between 14 and 18. But when the brain is rewiring and it hits those areas that are missing, or that it hits those areas where it triggers their past trauma, it's a whole different world for trauma teens. And so I need my friends that really get trauma, and then I need my people who can drop everything and come over and be there when my garage door needs to be fixed.
Yeah. And a lot of time, and then sometimes what happens is the kid actually will do something that is a part of you, and you see yourself in the kid, and then boom, now you're at odds with the kid, and you're fighting the kid, and really you're fighting yourself, because, not to get into like Star Wars and Darth Vader, but you see yourself, in the kid, and you're like, that's the part of me I don't like, and now I'm gonna. But really, it's you, right?
Yeah.
And I have encouraged many families, and I've gone to therapy myself. I'm not against therapy. I love EMDR therapy or brain spotting therapy. Look it up. But if I'm not healthy,
right,
then it's just going to be two disorganized people fighting every day. And but when I can look at a child through empathy and through love and say, this isn't about me, this child's not trying to hurt me, this is their experience talking, this is their trauma talking. And if I can really start to say, okay, do I need to fight this battle today? Do I even need to open my mouth today? Or do I just need to love them and try to make this into a connective situation rather than a lectures? And we talk against lecturing and threatening the kids and yelling at the kids, because it doesn't work in your marriage either. And so in this theme that we've been really trying to promote right now during COVID, because this is being filmed during COVID and no shave November, if you're curious about the beard, we're just trying to help people avoid extra triggers, extra problems. You can do telehealth now. You can do therapy from your phone. If you really want therapy, it's super convenient nowadays. And take care of yourself. So we're not personalizing, and we're refilling our tanks, right? And so I'd like to end this with just better understanding about Defending the Cause, which is a really cool ministry that you've created, you and your husband. I'm assuming he helped. Why and what?
Absolutely. Well, Defending the Cause is a network of agencies, nonprofits, and local churches in the greater Sacramento area who are advocates for vulnerable kids and families. And so we really feel like each one of those organizations brings something special to the table. And then when we all work together, it's like that village wrapping around the families in crisis, or the kids in the foster care system, or those who are just needing that stable, loving adult in their life. And so really this was kind of birthed out of a desire to see collaboration instead of competition between organizations. And it was also birthed to help families in crisis find exactly the resources that they need to help them succeed, and hopefully families stay together. But for the kids, again, in foster care, that reunification is not the best option for them. It's helping them find and land in a safe, loving home.
Yeah, and so they're not asking for money. And neither is Koinonia. We're really trying to promote health and healing with families, and keeping families intact, whether it's adoption families or families, biological situations where it's not about foster care. We just want you to be healed. We want you to be healthy. We want you to find services. And what I've noticed is in our industry, there's so many cool organizations, and really the problem is nobody knows about it or understands it. Whether I know I was talking with Destiny Community Center yesterday, and the amazing work that they've done there, and it's amazing, but no one knows. And so, like, in CASA programs, you have CASA, Save Families, you have, like, everybody who's anybody who helps people, pretty much as part of your guys's, and other foster care and adoption, mental health agencies, not just Koinonia. And that's an amazing thing. And now, as an adoptive parent, you're probably partaking yourself, I would imagine, some of these services, you know?
Yeah, it was interesting. Defending the Cause is coming up on our 5th anniversary, so we've been around for almost 5 years. Okay. Our kids have only been home for 3, and it's already been significantly beneficial for me because now I know where in the community to go when we're needing, you know, some nurture group services in home, you know, calling up your friend Benetta and she's coming to my house. I know the top trauma therapists and TBRI providers, and we're developing all sorts of an arsenal of online tools and workshops so that we can bring things to you in this era of transitioning to more digital resources so we can reach people. And so
things are becoming more centralized. And what's amazing is there's lots of agencies who are underfunded, right? And then you got other agencies who are doing the same thing, and they might have the funding. And rather than each agency or each church, because churches really need to understand this system too of service, and we can just wrap around those that are doing it and support each other rather than each of us creating identical systems. You know, now to a degree, there's always going to be competition because there's multiple agencies out there. But you know what? None of us are big enough to do all the work. The work is too much. And so I really encourage you to check it out. We'll link you up at the bottom of this to their organization. And it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing story. And I really appreciate you coming and tell your husband I said hi. And
will do.
You know, I remember having lunch with him before he got the kids, and just you guys were so thoughtful to try to make it as easy as possible for the kids. And that's what we want to do. We don't want to spoil the kids. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, what can we do to better understand what they're feeling in this process? So we want to be trauma informed, but we also want to support the parents as well. And so...
Yeah. And I would close out on that topic of trauma-informed care. It's just putting on the realization that trauma does actually change things in kids' brains. Even the size of the brain is impacted by trauma, the way the brain processes information. You mentioned fight, flight, and freeze. That's triggered very quickly in a child from past trauma. There's so many layers to what trauma does. And we just need to know about them. When we're informed, it allows us to, like you said, be mindful and regulate our own systems and provide that stable environment. And so parents and caregivers out there, taking care of your history and knowing your triggers and then getting more information on trauma is so important. We know there's waves of trauma that happened in just the average family this year.
It's been a rough year.
It has been a rough year. There's been so much loss of normalcy and so many things that kids enjoy doing that they can't do right now. And so this is a coined term that I think is going to be ever present in our society because trauma is real. You watch the news at night and trauma's everywhere.
Well, and now we can all have a trauma bond. You know, we can all just bond together and support each other, knowing that we all went through a very difficult year, but you know, we're surviving it. You know, let's walk away as friends. That's my hope, is that you don't get to hating. I mean, divorce rates, I guess, shot up during COVID. And that's part of why I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to help some people here. And I can't come to your home, but maybe you can listen to a podcast. But hey, let's stick together. Let's stay friends a little bit longer and make it through it. Okay. So thank you so much for taking the time and letting us chat about ministry and your life. I think real stories speak to real people. So anyway, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.